ounces. Bauxite. Mr. Speaker, in February 2020, one of the key bauxite producers suspended operations on account of industrial unrest and damage to company property. And to date, no decision has been taken on resumption of this company's operations. Though there was continued production from the other companies, the performance of the industry was well below that of 2019, with overall production estimated to have fallen by over 65%. Mr. Speaker, having assessed the current state of the sector, a policy framework for bauxite development will be considered in 2021 in line with our manifesto promises for implementation over the medium term. Suffice it to say, Mr. Speaker, that our government will continue to do all that it takes to support growth and expansion in this sector. Sand. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, sand production is estimated to have fallen by over 40% on account of the pandemic and political-related slowdown in construction activity across the country. With both private and public investment expected to rebound in 2021 and grow over the next 2 to 3 years, it is important to ensure sufficient access to quality local materials. Stone. Mr. Speaker, comparing 2019 with 2014, stone production, which is a critical component for building our nation's physical infrastructure, declined by an estimated 49.9%. Having assumed office, Mr. Speaker, in addition to removing the value-added tax on machinery and equipment and ATVs, in our last budget, our government in December issued a license to a local company who will operate what has the potential to be the largest quarry in Guyana and in the Caribbean. That quarry is expected to begin operations in mid-2021. The licensed area covers 7,000 acres, and the company plans to produce approximately 20,000 metric tons weekly. Another 3 licenses to prepare for the extraction of the mineral, and another 400 to be employed when full operations begin later this year. The company is currently engaged in the environmental social impact assessment with the EPA, a requirement under their mineral license application. They're in design and construction phase of the mine, port, and haulage system. Over the medium term, the development of the mine will see the transporting of manganese to Port Kaituma, where a wharf will be constructed to accommodate vessels to transport the mineral from our port. The total manganese resource is estimated at 26 million tons, and the company is expected to mine some 2 million tons per year, with the life of the operation lasting some 12 to 13 years. Forestry. Mr. Speaker, successive PPPC governments have long recognized that our forest generates multiple sources of revenue and livelihoods, whether from the protected standing forests that contribute to the quality of air on the planet, while generating payments for forest conservation, as discussed earlier, or sustainable forest management that enables individual livelihoods to be built around the harvesting of our various species of wood, or the rich untapped biodiversity. Mr. Speaker, in the 5 years prior to us leaving office in 2015, the average growth rate in this sector was 7.9%, and the average growth in export earnings for the period was 7%. Following that, for the period 2015 to 2019, the APNU completely reversed this. Production contracted by an average of 7.4%. And export earnings by an average of 8.6%. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, the Guyana Forestry Commission was pushed into bankruptcy. Since we resumed office, We have made significant strides in reversing this position. Financing sources were immediately provided to not only support the struggling operations of the Forestry Commission, but also to pay outstanding emoluments to the staff. And the Commission is now being positioned to return to self-sufficiency. Our government has also adjusted the national log export policy effective October 12, 2020, to expand access to markets for our quality timber products. And we've begun to set the path for sustainable production through improved monitoring and planning. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, we removed the value-added tax on machinery and equipment, provided tax concessions on ATVs, and reversed VAT on exports and on hinterland travel, all with effect from October 1st, 2020. This government is confident that in the medium term, the forestry sector will grow to become an even greater contributor to our diversified non-oil economy. And the point really, Mr. Speaker, that I seek to make here is that we do have a remarkable potential for developing a large, vibrant, and dynamic non-oil economy. Still on forestry, Mr. Speaker, in 2021, we will advance progress under the National Forest Inventory Program. This initiative will provide specific information on types, locations, and quantities of timber within our forests. This will help improve national and concessional level planning. Notably, the last inventory was executed some 50 years ago. This year, $250 million has been budgeted for the implementation of the second phase of this initiative, with activities planned for regions 2, 7, 9, and 10. This initiative will create a reference data set on forest resources for long-term monitoring and decision-making, and is expected to continue over the medium term. Agriculture and food safety. Mr. Speaker, over the last 5 years, the agriculture sector suffered callous neglect, being left in complete decay as if the intention was to consign it into complete non-existence. In stark contrast, this People's Progressive Party civic government's intention is that agriculture will be one of the major anchors of our non-oil economy. It has a core role to assure food safety, improve incomes, and create jobs, generate export earnings, and reduce food imports, catalyze value-added production, especially when we would have achieved a lowering of the cost of energy. Notwithstanding the hostile environment in which the agricultural sector operated over the last 5 years, the sector accounted for 27.1% of non-oil GDP and 21.3% of non-oil exports. One can only imagine, Mr. Speaker, what the sector would be able to achieve in a favorable environment. To ensure the sector is able to discharge its envisaged role, our government will invest in opening new farm-to-market roads, clearing and preparing new lands, expanding the infrastructure in the intermediate savannas, expanding drainage and irrigation networks to make new land available for small, medium, and mega farms, strengthen extension services through additional and improved facilities, traceability and certification services to reduce existing trade barriers, research and development, and coordinating and facilitating private sector participation in agriculture-based tourism. To complement these initiatives, we will build human resource capacity to deliver the services required to drive growth in the sector. Mr. Speaker, with this holistic plan for agriculture, Guyana is well poised to claim its long outstanding position as the breadbasket of the Caribbean. Supporting livelihoods and transforming not only our economy, but that of the region. In 2021, Mr. Speaker, expenditure in the agriculture sector is expected to increase to $22.6 billion from $18.3 billion. Mr. Speaker, if I may turn now to sugar. Mr. Speaker, hundreds of years of sugar cultivation since colonial Guyana were brutally slaughtered at the altar of political expediency over the past 5 years. And it was done in a manner that will long be remembered as one of the most unconscionable acts committed by that APNU AFC government. On assuming office, we met a situation where 7,000 sugar workers were unceremoniously shoved onto the breadline by a government that displayed no concern for the social and economic hardships that the arbitrary decision to close the lifeblood of rural Demerara and rural Berbice would cause to ordinary people. The rippling effect of this action coursed through the entire coastal Guyana, spreading shock, dismay, disbelief, and a sense of hopelessness. Hundreds of thousands of persons were affected directly and indirectly. Small and micro businesses, small market vendors were decimated as business dried up, and entire communities were devastated. While 3 sugar estates were closed, the other 3 that were reluctantly kept open were left to limp along with little to no capital investments during the APNU AFC tenure. By the time we entered office, sugar production had plummeted to its lowest level ever, and the Gaisuco was in dire financial straits. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the prophets of doom, this government stands ready, willing, and resolute to deliver on our policy and manifesto promise to the sugar workers and to all Guyanese. In this context, we have appointed a new board and new management. Together, the board and management are charged with responsibility for conducting a detailed diagnostic of the industry in order to reboot the industry, to make it fit for purpose, for sugar and value-added opportunities, including diversification into non-traditional areas. Work is currently ongoing on developing a master plan, estate by estate, to guide the future of the industry. Possible elements of that master plan that are currently being considered include the following. Gaisuco could concentrate increasingly on redirecting its efforts towards an optimized product mix, a shift away from the current low-value bulk sugar market. In this regard, the corporation could quadruple its sales into the packaged sugar market, both locally and internationally, over the next 5 years. To this end, the Blairmont packaging plant could be expanded by 3 new packaging machines, and an expansion of the storage bond so that inventory can be available at all times to service the international market with the world-famous Demerara Gold packaged sugar. Further, Mr. Speaker, the Enmore packaging plant could also be expanded to 5 operational packaging lines. Mr. Speaker, at Albion, Blairmont, and Iflot, more than 60% of the access roads are in a deplorable state, and more than 50% of the fleet of land preparation and tillage machines were allowed to deteriorate beyond repair. Additionally, more than 40% of the cane transport fleet, particularly the punts, were left to deteriorate to the point of disuse. Targeted investments will be needed to correct the situation over the medium term. Investments in cane cultivation will help to ensure that ratoons that are currently over 10 years old will be replaced over a 5-year period at the rate of 20% per annum, helping to revert to the standard procedure of replanting every 5 years. Mr. Speaker, on the matter of the 3 estates that were closed by the APNU AFC government, we are currently assessing the damages and the cost to rehabilitate these estates, to make them profitable cost centers, including but not limited to introducing public-private partnerships, agro-industrial and agro-energy opportunities, pursuing product diversification and retraining where necessary. Mr. Speaker, given the importance of sugar in the domestic economy, and the manner in which this sector affects overall socioeconomic conditions in rural Berbice and rural Demerara, we shall continue to work with all stakeholders, including the private sector, in ensuring that the viability of this industry is preserved. To this end, Budget 2021 provides an allocation of $2 billion for critical capital works at Guyana. Mr. Speaker, the rice industry, turning to rice now, has demonstrated resilience, as I mentioned earlier, despite the difficult environment in which farmers and millers were forced to operate over the last 5 years. Our government has taken steps to ease the farmers from the burdensome overhead expenses imposed on them by reversing the punitive increases in land rents and taxes on agricultural equipment, machinery, fertilizers, and chemicals. For example, the rice farmers under the Mahika-Maikonia-Bari Agricultural Development Authority, MMA, will now see about $1.3 billion back in their hands annually with the reversal of land rent increases. By 2024, we expect a dramatic increase in annual rice production over the next 5 years, ensuring that the crop remains a mainstay in our agricultural output. The increase will be propelled by enhanced research and development, adoption of new technologies, and promotion of new high-yielding varieties, increased maintenance of drainage and irrigation systems and farm-to-market roads, and establishment of new markets. Mr. Speaker, in October 2020, a new high-yielding variety of paddy was released, which should produce 7 to 8 tons of paddy per hectare, 1 to 2 tons more than our current yield. By 2023, another high-yielding variety is expected to be released. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, 6 drying floors will be constructed at strategic rice-producing locations to provide much-needed support to farmers in regions 2, 3, 5, and 6. And a soil laboratory will be established to facilitate efficient and economic production of paddy. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, 5 long-reach sprayers will be acquired to control paddy bugs on dams and fields efficiently. A motorized thresher will be published to aid in plant breeding experiments. A laboratory will be constructed for experimental trials on value-added rice products. A post-harvest value-added department will be established at GRDB, and physical and sensory analyses will be pursued for shelf life studies for rice and rice-based food products. Mr. Speaker, these initial steps will position the rice industry to gain the momentum needed to achieve its targeted growth in the medium term. Other crops. Mr. Speaker, the expansion of cultivation of non-traditional crops is critical for diversification of the economy. In 2021, support for the establishment of over 100 shade houses countrywide will be provided, with a view to increasing the production of vegetables. To meet the high demand for planting materials for citrus, government will continue to provide assistance which will benefit farmers, particularly in the Pomeroon, in Region 3, and the Linden-Soesdijk Highway. Research-based extension support will be intensified for fruit production to improve productivity and meeting the growing demand of domestic fruit juice manufacturers. Mr. Speaker, to this end, over $1.2 billion is budgeted to support the operations of the National Agricultural Research and Extension Institute, NARI. Mr. Speaker, coconut is the new frontier crop of the sector and is expected to take off over the medium term. This administration will fund the establishment of 4 new coconut nurseries at Wakanam, Leg 1, Canal number 2, and number 63 in the quarantine. These will each produce 1,500 to 3,000 coconut seedlings every 3 months. As such, farmers can benefit from high-quality planting material at an affordable cost. Technical training on intercropping and cultivation will be provided to farmers to help them optimize their returns on investment. Mr. Speaker, support from government will see the private sector investing in over 1,000 acres of coconut estates in the near term. To support this effort, Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 provides over $70 million to support Hope Coconut Estate. Corn and soybean also represent a major new frontier in the other crop sector. In 2021, government will cultivate 100 acres of planting material to support the production of corn and will make it available to farmers at affordable prices. This is intended to reduce the importation of this commodity and will augment plans for large-scale corn and soybean cultivation expected under the Intermediate Savanna Development Initiative, which I shall discuss shortly. Agro-processing. In 2021, government will invest $832 million in agricultural infrastructure, including agro-processing and packaging facilities. These interventions will be done in Lesby-Holden, Parika, Sophia, St. Ignatius, Arnaputa, Karakara, and the intermediate savannas. Farmers will now have access to affordable state-of-the-art processing and packaging at reduced operational costs. Moreover, government will provide laboratory services to agro-processors to ensure they can attain the necessary standards and certifications in a timely manner and at an affordable cost. Mr. Speaker, government will also be taking steps to strengthen the cold storage capacity for seasonal produce destined for exportation and processing. In this regard, 2 freezer trucks and 2 40-foot refrigerated containers will be procured at a cost of $60 million for the new GMC. Furthermore, in 2021, agro-processors can expect to benefit from the new GMC's one-stop agri-business incubator, through which equipment and human resources will be made available to provide technical and marketing support to agro-processors. Mr. Speaker, to support these initiatives, this budget provides an additional $293 million to the new GMC. Livestock. Mr. Speaker, our government remains committed to facilitating large-scale farming of livestock, working with the private sector. Through these partnerships, we will realize improvements in the quantity and quality of meat and meat products produced for both domestic and international markets. In 2020, government invested in high-quality livestock to increase farmers' access to better breeding stock for improved production and productivity. In 2021, we will facilitate the establishment of processing facilities, develop certification processes, and pursue access to regional and international markets for our local producers. Moreover, government will support investors by developing livestock traceability capacity to improve the accuracy and reliability of data, which is fundamental to meeting food safety standards and farm certification, and will help to promote exports. To support these initiatives, this budget provides $806 million to the Guyana Livestock Development Authority in 2021. Mr. Speaker, I might add that of this amount, government will invest in a modular abattoir at Garden of Eden, which will serve to fill the existing local market gap for processed pork and pork products, while creating more income-generating opportunities. Further, the construction of a modern abattoir at Onvawat for beef and beef products will help transform the cattle industry. Fisheries and aquaculture. Mr. Speaker, this government is keen to revitalize the fishing industry and has reversed increases in license fees, removed taxes on fishing equipment, and allowed fish exporters to reclaim VAT on inputs to production. Over the medium term, government will focus on supporting the development of inland fisheries and aquaculture through amendments to the aquaculture and inland fisheries regulations, finalize a strategic plan for the subsector, and develop guidelines for sustainable aquaculture and the ornamental industry, amongst other initiatives. Currently, Mr. Speaker, the cost of production for aquaculture products is significantly impacted by the cost of feed, which accounts for 60 to 70% of production cost. In an effort to encourage increased investment and productivity, government will be facilitating feed formulation research with the aim of reducing the cost of feed to below $200 per kilogram. A breeding program for indigenous species is also being developed at the Satyadeo Saw Aquaculture Station, where hatcheries will provide fingerlings at a subsidized cost to farmers. Work is underway towards addressing the reversal of the US ban on catfish. Mr. Speaker, this government expects that the aquaculture subsector holds great promise as a source of growth in the agriculture sector as a whole in the future. An amount of $293 million is budgeted to support the growth of this emerging industry. The Intermediate Savanna Development Initiative. Mr. Speaker, the intermediate savanna is considered a vast, untapped opportunity for agricultural development in Guyana. It has the potential to produce both crops and livestock in an integrated production system that encompasses annual and perennial crops and small and large ruminant production. The commodities targeted for the intermediate savanna are corn, soybean, aquaculture, of which I spoke earlier, cattle rearing, and orchard crops like citrus and fruits, all of which have great potential for processing. Government will provide an enabling environment by opening up land, providing infrastructure and incentive support to transform the area and improve the livelihoods of persons residing in the adjoining communities. In Budget 2021, $500 million will be invested in supportive infrastructure to catalyze private investment in the production of corn and soybean in the intermediate savannas. It is envisaged that mega farms will cultivate tens of thousands of hectares, benefiting from the economies of scale in modern grain production, thereby leading to higher production and productivity. Meanwhile, small farmers will also be reoriented to modernize their agricultural practices. Drainage and irrigation. Mr. Speaker, the drainage and irrigation network is one of the primary support structures for the agricultural sector. Our agenda is to promote production, diversification, and flood risk management, and is reinforced by our substantial investments in this sector. In 2021, this government is reaffirming its commitment to supporting the drainage and irrigation systems by investing $12 billion in critical interventions across the country. These include construction and rehabilitation of pump stations at Adventure, Blackbush Polder, Cottage, and Montrose, supporting over 54,000 acres of coastal farmlands. Procurement of 2 excavators and a pontoon to desilt channels in the Pomeroon River, facilitating improved access to farms, and development of water harvesting mechanisms to support farms in the south-central Rupununi, alleviating the significant losses incurred there during the dry season. Mr. Speaker, these interventions will result in a reduction of vulnerability and flood risks by promoting climate resilience. The reduction of risk and losses will encourage increased production of rice, coconut, vegetables, fruits, and livestock in these areas. Mr. Speaker, turning now to tourism. The global tourism industry is amongst the most affected sectors by the COVID-19 pandemic, with an estimated decline of 70 to 75% in international arrivals when compared to 2019. Mr. Speaker, in Guyana, visitor arrivals are estimated to have fallen by 72.5% in 2020, from 314,727 to 86,503. This decline, no doubt, was associated not only with COVID-19, but also with the political developments of 2020, the domestic political events of 2020. Mr. Speaker, with measures in place to limit transmission of the virus, the tourism and hospitality industry came to a virtual standstill, halting travel experiences, in-person engagements, and virtually every other aspect of the industry. Despite this, our government recognizes the tourism industry as poised for a rapid takeoff once travel restrictions ease. Mr. Speaker, Guyana currently has in excess of 150 hotels and 30 resorts and lodges, with an approximate room capacity of 3,400. But most of these can be characterized as traditional and rustic establishments, with only a small number of business-oriented accommodation properties of international standard. Against this backdrop, this government, immediately upon assuming office, invited expressions of interest from private investors desirous of developing new hotel properties that would improve the quantity and quality of accommodation in Guyana. Mr. Speaker, more than 25 expressions of interest were received and memoranda of understanding concluded with potential investors. These projects are all privately financed, and many of them involve major international hotel brands. It is expected, Mr. Speaker, that as many as 6 of them could start construction in 2021. These initial incoming investments will add an additional 1,000 hotel rooms in the near term, and the others potentially could add a total of 2,000 to 3,000 hotel rooms in the medium term, catalyzing the development of the accommodation subsector and dramatically improving overall industry standards. Mr. Speaker, along with room capacity, the tourism sector has also been hampered by a skills gap at all levels, with few opportunities for top quality training. To address this glaring mismatch between demand and supply, in 2021, work will commence on the construction of the Hospitality Tourism Training Institute. On completion, this facility will cater for more than 1,800 students to be trained and certified annually. This will support the growth and development of this important emerging sector, help provide a world-class experience in service delivery, and put thousands of young Guyanese in work. Mr. Speaker, an amount of $185 million is budgeted to start this project in 2021. During the year, we will also seek to increase air connectivity and to make access easier for airline operators and reduce costs for air travel. Mr. Speaker, with JetBlue having made its inaugural flight back in December 2020, government will pursue partnerships with other airlines and aim to encourage airlines to establish new routes to Guyana once travel conditions begin to return to a state of normalcy. Mr. Speaker, the pandemic has created the opportunity also for tourism actors and operators to re-evaluate their products and offerings and re-examine the possibilities of expanding tour packages that would appeal not just to foreigners, but to Guyanese also, both local and in the diaspora. To improve the resilience of the sector over the medium term, the sector will focus on offering unique culinary tours, new products like unique culinary tours, excursions, soft adventure, and experiential tours in an effort to diversify the tourism product portfolio. Additionally, the domestic tourism market is yet to realize its full potential. The government has established regional tourism committees in a number of regions and will work with them to help develop the local tourism product, including by more active promotion of event-based tourism and local niche attractions, such as Easter on the number 63 beach in Region 6, Regatta at Bartica in Region 7, Rodeo at Lethem in Region 9, and the Fish Festival at Rockstone in Region 10. And of course, the Safari Run. Turning now, Mr. Speaker, to information and communication technology. The importance of information and communication technology, ICTs, for creating, catalyzing, and sustaining economic growth and development and creating jobs is more evident today than it has ever been. One of the first steps taken by this People's Progressive Party civic government as soon as we assumed office was the liberalization of the telecommunications sector. And I hasten to point out, sir, that this was a campaign promise that we delivered 64 days after we took office. This strategic move will stimulate greater competition and investments, which will expand the sector and the range of ICT services available to the population, as well as reduce costs of various services to consumers and allow for more fiber optic cables to be landed in Guyana. In fact, Guyanese have already benefited tangibly from lower rates and special promotions for data plans, while some operators have committed to major technology upgrades. At least one regional company has also signaled plans to locate all of their customer care operations in Guyana. Going forward, Mr. Speaker, it is expected that liberalization will result in significant interest in private investment in the sector. This year, government will establish the Universality Fund, a feature of the new telecommunications regulatory regime, through which access to modern telecommunications services can be funded for our poor and vulnerable communities, including those in our hinterland regions. The Telecommunications Act and regulations provide for contributions to this fund from operators, and we expect a minimum of $360 million to be made available to the fund this year. A plan is being prepared that will specify feasible projects to be implemented by the private sector, which will boost connectivity for businesses in unserved and underserved communities. Mr. Speaker, our government will also move swiftly to ensure that the benefits of the liberalization reach all sectors in the form of faster and cheaper internet service. This will serve as a catalyst for ICT-related business development and make business more efficient and resilient and drive job creation. In that regard, we already expect that over 450 jobs will be created in the area of business process outsourcing, with the operationalization of call centers at Tushen, Enmore, and Linden, partly facilitated by decreased cost of internet service. Our government will also be engaging with the business process outsourcing sector with a view to facilitating scaled-up presence in Guyana and more rapid job creation in that sector. Budget 2021 includes an amount of $67 million to rehabilitate the facility in Linden, which is expected to host a call center there. Mr. Speaker, if I may turn now to the subject of industrial development and manufacturing. For so long, We have been forced to import, or we have imported fossil fuels to generate energy. We have heard our manufacturers and potential investors belabor the cost of energy as a constraint, or indeed the key constraint, to investing or expanding. Mr. Speaker, in 2023, with the planned gas-to-shore pipeline at a proposed location along the west bank of Demerara, Guyana will finally be able to expand manufacturing opportunities with a low-cost source of energy, access to labor from surrounding housing developments, and a ready road network. This, Mr. Speaker, will be the Wales Development Authority. Mr. Speaker, the Wales Development Authority will not only distinguish itself as the industrial center of the Caribbean, it will serve the very immediate relevant domestic purpose of mass employment generation. When in operation, the authority stands to employ well over 3,000 persons on a full-time basis in fields ranging from manual, technical, professional, and administrative jobs, amongst others, across the various enterprises to be located within the precinct of the authority. This, of course, is not taking into consideration the myriad range of indirect employment that will be generated, which very easily will account for a figure well beyond that established for direct employment. Mr. Speaker, the government will commence work on the Wales Development Authority by drafting and passing the requisite legislation to create the authority during 2021. As we speak, consulting services are being procured to conduct the geotechnical, geophysical, environmental impact, and light detection and ranging studies to determine the location where the gas line would land, as well as the sites for the drying facilities, cogeneration plant, and essential petrochemical industries. The construction of the cogeneration plant and laying of the pipeline will begin next year and finish during 2023. When the power plant comes on stream, the electricity cost will be a fraction of the current rate paid by consumers. This reduction in electricity cost is expected to attract large industrial, agro-processing, and manufacturing firms. Mr. Speaker, to make the Wales Development Authority even more attractive as an industrial zone, special incentives will also be provided to motivate investors to set up operations in Wales. This strategic policy initiative by our government, providing tangible support to these non-oil sectors, will ultimately provide the enabling environment for the country's diversification efforts to take root and become sustainable. In this regard, a sustainable and competitive agriculture and manufacturing sector that will be supported through the Wales Development Authority will provide the groundwork for overall sustainable and robust economic performance. Small business support. Mr. Speaker, our government has always advocated small and micro enterprises as an important avenue for entry into entrepreneurial activity and as an area of endeavor with tremendous potential to provide gainful engagement to thousands of persons. And as we said recently at another forum, the small businesses of today are the medium and large businesses of tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, amongst the main concerns for small business owners and new entrepreneurs in Guyana is access to financing. To ameliorate this situation, we will utilize the Small Business Development Fund the Small Business Fund and will engage microfinancing institutions and the microcredit windows of commercial banks to stimulate investments and create jobs in the productive sector. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, many of our fiscal measures, such as the removal of VAT on a range of items in 2020, would have immediately reduced the cost of doing business across the board. Mr. Speaker, in 4 short months of assuming office, the ceiling in grant funding at the Small Business Bureau was increased from $200,000 to $500,000. This served to attract greater registration with the Bureau. In 2021, government intends to harness the business acumen of small businesses, incubate more business ideas and innovations of these businesses, extend training and capacity services to create and sustain entrepreneurial opportunities for the small business sector. And for this purpose, Mr. Speaker, a sum of $250 million is budgeted to replenish the fund. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, government will commit, or has committed rather, to the establishment of a National Entrepreneurship and Innovation Council, which will radically reform the culture of entrepreneurship in Guyana and create an impetus for new entrepreneurs while supporting existing ones. Mr. Speaker, the National Quality Infrastructure, a reference laboratory, and the electronic single window facility are initiatives which aim towards the digitalization of the licensing process and are flagship projects which will improve the quality of products and services on a national scale, particularly in the case of the national quality infrastructure, and the ease of doing business and trade facilitation in the case of the electronic single window. Budget 2021 has provided a sum of $135 million for the procurement of an electronic single window system, which is expected to be finalized, and a further $200 million to the National Quality Infrastructure Project. We will also roll out a national e-commerce strategy to ensure that local businesses harness the economic benefits of online markets. Mr. Speaker, our government will also seek to enhance the successful development and operationalization of startups and existing businesses through access to business incubator centers with shared manufacturing and business development facilities. To this end, work has commenced on the identification of suitable locations for the establishment of 2 new industrial estates. Mr. Speaker, this period will also see the development of many other niche programs to support business sectors in the areas of tourism as well as ICT. I turn now, Mr. Speaker, to transformational infrastructure. First, energy. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, we have long recognized that the single biggest impediment to accelerated economic and social development is the absence of adequate, affordable, and reliable energy. Key challenges include dependence on an aged fossil fuel-based generation capability, inadequate generating capacity resulting in supply shortfalls, a very porous transmission and distribution network resulting in high technical losses, as well as high commercial losses. Against this background, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, this government, when we were previously in office, we had advanced plans to construct the Amila Falls hydropower project. And I have already alluded to the unconscionable tactics of the APNU AFC, who effectively stymied our drive to harness this important project. Their actions, and their actions alone, resulted in that project not being materialized. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to announce that government intends to reactivate efforts to ensure that our national grid is augmented with sustainable, cheap, and reliable hydropower. More immediately, Mr. Speaker, Guyanese anxiously await the prospect of piping gas to shore. This, Mr. Speaker, to which I alluded when I spoke of the Wales Development Authority, will see cheap and reliable energy generated to meet our growing demand for electricity. Conceptualized as a 210-kilometer pipeline to transport natural gas from offshore Guyana, the gas-to-power project will be the trailblazer to advance Guyana's path to domestic energy security within the next 3 years. This transformational project includes the establishment of a power plant to generate up to 250 megawatts of power. The establishment of the industrial park to which I referred earlier, and the creation of a local LPG plant to cater for domestic demand and for the export market. During 2021, detailed studies will be conducted to inform government on all of the relevant technical considerations as we advance this project and bring this plant into operation by 2023. Mr. Speaker, given the high levels of growth forecasted beyond the gas-to-shore project, our vision is to develop and exploit a comprehensive energy mix, comprehensive and diversified energy mix that harnesses our vast hydropower, solar, wind, and biomass potential, conscious always of sustaining and preserving our pristine environment. Mr. Speaker, a sum of $700 million has been budgeted for the installation of 10 mini-grids and 4 off-grid systems in 2021. This will provide a total of 1.472 kilowatts of installed solar capacity, thereby generating 5,305 kilowatt hours of electricity. The areas which will benefit from this initiative include Sebay, Ewokrama, Waramadong, Parima, Kurkubaru, Anay, St. Monica, Karaburi, Kapwe, Wayaka, and Lou Creek. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, solar farms will be installed at Madhya and Legwan, and work will continue on solar farms at Bartika and Lethem. Moreover, 2 mini hydropower plants at Kumu and at Makomaka will be tendered this year, and construction will commence. The 150 kilowatt Kato hydropower project is also expected to be substantially completed in 2021. Mr. Speaker, sums totaling $850 million have been budgeted to cover those initiatives. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, on grid, we will continue to invest in GPL and encourage policy initiatives to meet and eventually surpass the ever-expanding demand placed on our grid. In line with this, GPL is executing fundamental infrastructural investments, particularly to promote loss reduction and improve the performance of its power distribution networks. Mr. Speaker, to assist in resolving the difficult financial situation in which GPL was placed as a result of the accumulation of vast sum of arrears by the APNU AFC government, Budget 2021 provides a sum of $2 billion to continue to clear the stock of receivable arrears we inherited at GPL. Transport infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, our government has mandated the articulation of a national infrastructure investment pipeline, which outlines current and future public sector investments that will create, upgrade, and rehabilitate the country's infrastructure landscape from coastland to hinterland. In this regard, our infrastructure gaps will be met with major transformative investment initiatives in every region. Roads and bridges. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, government has allocated $25.6 billion for roads and bridges. Of this sum, $23.7 billion will be spent on roads and $1.9 billion on bridges. This will see investments being made in upgrading a number of existing major roads and bridges, as well as initiating several new projects. Mr. Speaker, an amount of $3.5 billion has been allocated for the commencement of the Linden to Mabura Road. And tenders will be launched in the first quarter. A further sum of $150 million has been budgeted for sectional rehabilitation of the Linden to Soesdijk Highway. In order to address the continuous traffic chaos on the East Bank Demerara Public Road, construction has already begun on a road linkage between Diamond to Mukka, connecting to an existing road network from Herstelling to Eccles. Mr. Speaker, in Budget 2021, our government has allocated the sum of $1 billion to continue and complete the construction of a 4-lane highway from Eccles to Mandela Avenue. This will significantly reduce travel time for tens of thousands of commuters who traverse this corridor every day. Mr. Speaker, over the next few years, a dramatic transformation will be witnessed in our country's roads and bridges network, creating new corridors for development in the agro-industrial, light manufacturing, commercial, and tourism sectors, paving the way for massive residential housing development and easing congestion. I will mention, Mr. Speaker, a few examples of these major projects that we will see unfolding in the coming months and years. The link between the East Coast Demerara Highway to Timeri, connecting our two major airports, the Chedi Jagan International Airport and the Eugene Correa International Airport. Establishing the Skunard to Parika 4-lane superhighway, connecting communities throughout the west coast of Demerara. Developing the Parika to Goshen route, establishing a linkage for the trade and commercial centers of Parika with the central gateway town of Bartika. developing the Timeri-Tubartica link, connecting the west bank of Demerara, or the west bank of the Demerara River at Sand Hills, to Macquarie on the Essequibo River, crossing at Monkey Jump, Tubartica. Mr. Speaker, these routes will be established with a survey alignment to be completed in 2021, and clearing of the right-of-way will commence while we mobilize financing for construction works. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, we will be constructing a major farm-to-market road from number 58 village linking the Quarantine Coast Highway to the Kanji Creek.
That's a big word.
This will open vast acreage of arable agricultural land to benefit farmers across the region. Mr. Speaker, preliminary designs are being completed, while survey and right-of-way alignment will be conducted, and the works will commence in 2021. Mr. Speaker, bridging of the Demerara and Quarantine rivers will also take center stage in this government's plan to revitalize our physical landscape and open developmental opportunities in surrounding areas. To accomplish this, we have forged ahead by inviting expressions of interest for the design and build of the new Demerara River Bridge crossing. To this end, we've received proposals from a total of 20 companies. Indeed, I had the privilege of joining my distinguished colleague, Minister Edgell, at the opening of those proposals. Mr. Speaker, 9 firms have been shortlisted, and the process now moves to the second round, where more detailed designs, costing, and financial terms will be assessed. The new design of the high-span bridge will allow for free flow of maritime traffic, as it will not require opening or retraction, and it will be built with a lifespan of at least 50 years. On the Quarantine River Bridge, the governments of Guyana and Suriname have invited expressions of interest for the construction of that bridge. In preparation for this massive transformative project, we will commence preparatory works to upgrade the road from Molson Creek to El Dorado. With the ultimate goal, in due course, to extend to Oriala Siparuta. Mr. Speaker, amounts totaling $9 billion have been allocated under the miscellaneous and other roads programs. And I add further that an additional $2.1 billion has been allocated to upgrade hinterland roads. Mr. Speaker, air transport. On assuming office, immediately confronting us was a modified and poorly redesigned Chedi Jagan International Airport. This forced us to take drastic measures to remedy the situation, to ensure that the project fulfills its commitment to be a modern international airport. In this regard, agreement was recently reached with the contractor to accommodate 2 more boarding bridges for large transatlantic aircraft and to construct the superstructure and facade for the new commercial complex, which will house additional duty-free shops, restaurants, and lounges. And I hasten to add, at no additional cost to government. Mr. Speaker, looking to the future, we will place the CGIA back on track to be a regional hub. Yeah. In Budget 2021, a sum of $2.5 billion is allocated for the further upgrade and modernization of the airport to finance other major improvements, including procurement of the 2 passenger boarding bridges to accommodate the said large transatlantic aircraft. This will bring the total number of bridges to 6. Rehabilitating the airport, the airline and airport administration offices, and outfitting the commercial complex. Mr. Speaker, in addition, an amount of $415 million is budgeted for the completion, upgrade, and rehabilitation of a number of hinterland airstrips. Turning now to river and maritime transport. Mr. Speaker, under the previous administration, residents and commuters traveling to and from the Northwest District were deprived the benefit of a modern ferry service, even though funding for the acquisition of the vessel had been secured. Since taking office, this People's Progressive Party civic government has inked a $2.6 billion contract to construct an ocean-going passenger and cargo vessel to ply the Northwest District route to bring relief to struggling commuters. Additionally, under the same project, funds have been secured and allocated to rehabilitate the Morawana, Kumaka, and Port Kaituma stellings. In 2021, $1.2 billion has been budgeted to facilitate the implementation of this project. And I add further that an additional $500 million has been allocated to rehabilitate the MV Malali, the MV Macquarie, and the MV Kimbia. Mr. Speaker, looking ahead, the dynamics of our economy requires a reconceptualization of our maritime and river transport facilities. The traditional wharf facilities are already transforming to reflect shore-based operations to support the emerging oil and gas industry, while expanded manufacturing and trade activities will increasingly require modern port facilities. A critical aspect of our country's transport infrastructure for the future is therefore the development of a deepwater harbor. This will provide an essential transit point for international cargo, even more so once the Quarrying River Bridge and the road to Brazil are complete. This government remains engaged with potential partners on the possibility of developing this critical infrastructural investment. Sea and river defense. Mr. Speaker, the consequences of climate change, including rising sea levels on Guyana's sea and river defense infrastructure, can have and has had devastating impact on Guyana's economy, given how many of our inhabitants and how much of our economic activity are on the low-lying coastal plain. Mr. Speaker, within 2 days of taking office, our ministers were deployed to Danzig to grapple with the devastation of massive breached sections of the Maikoni Sea defense. Floodwaters inundated farmlands and residential communities, resulting in loss to property, livestock, and farming activities. The APNU AFC administration was negligent, first in anticipating and then in addressing the situation adequately, causing our new incoming government to deploy emergency arrangements to seal the breach, which had remained open and threatening for over 1 month previously. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, a total of $5.1 billion has been budgeted to further strengthen our sea and river defense infrastructure. Earmarked for this year is the construction, rehabilitation, and maintenance of sea and river defense infrastructure in areas including Danzig, Prospect, Cont'd, Fairfield, Zeeland, Cane Garden, Iflot, Anna Katrina, number 63 Beach, Manila, and Baijival. Mr. Speaker, government continues to keep close monitoring of our shoreline by reactivating the Sea Defense Rangers, applying drone technology to monitor shoreline movement and the erosion and accretion cycle, intensifying routine maintenance, and deploying stockpiles of armor rocks to strategic locations, all to ensure that quick response mechanisms are in place to avert breaches. Mr. Speaker, as we continue to make strident steps to protect our vulnerable shoreline, we have found that existing conventional hard infrastructure solutions are expensive and are not always adaptable to rising sea levels and climate change vulnerabilities. It is for this reason that we intend to promote more natural interventions in the form of groins and restored mangrove forests, from replanting and natural regeneration. These, we expect, will prove to be valuable complements to our significant investments in hard structures. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, $50 million, a sum of $50 million is budgeted to construct geotextile rubble groins and to conduct topographic surveys. Mr. Speaker, I turn now to investing in our people, and in particular to the health sector. Mr. Speaker, the year 2020 was an indelibly challenging one for the world in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our government assumed office and inherited a public health sector which was struggling to respond to the crisis. In addition, drug shortages and the lack of functioning equipment which plagued the public health sector forced an already poorly managed health system to be stretched even more thinly. The reach of government health programs for screening, testing, and treatment was also challenged due to the reduction of movement of people as a result of COVID-19 measures. Mr. Speaker, His Excellency's vision of transforming our healthcare system is one that is world-class, and this will drive our actions over the next 5 years. In order to achieve this vision, our administration intends to expand specialty-level care and, by extension, the menu of services offered to Guyanese. We intend to develop an adequate, well-trained, competent, and compassionate healthcare workforce, and to modernize and expand our health facilities to improve access to both primary and specialty-level care, while leveraging partnerships with the private sector and civil society. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, it would be recalled that in Budget 2020, we removed corporate taxes on the incomes earned, potential taxable income earned by companies investing in private health care. To begin delivering on this vision, while addressing the challenges of the pandemic, our government has significantly expanded the resources made available to the public healthcare system. And we have budgeted for 2021 sums totaling $53.5 billion. Mr. Speaker, in Budget 2021, to begin expanding diagnostic and specialty capacities across the country, we've provided $1.8 billion for the purchasing of critical medical equipment for the public health sector. Of this amount, $99.8 million is budgeted for re-equipping the ophthalmology center, the ophthalmology hospital in Port Morant. The only one of its kind in the country, one that was established when we were last in government, and one that was abandoned and left to languish over the last 5 years. Mr. Speaker, once resuscitated, we expect that the ophthalmology hospital in Port Morant will provide an indispensable service for our people, particularly the elderly. Mr. Speaker, government also intends to spend $322 million in 2021 for the acquisition of medical equipment, including such items as ventilators and anesthesia machines, which will serve to expand the diagnosis and treatment capacity at the National Referral Hospital. We have also budgeted an additional $35 million to strengthen our emergency medical services capacity, while we formulate a holistic plan to introduce an ambulance authority. Mr. Speaker, as we proceed along our first full fiscal year in office, we are fully aware that COVID-19 continues to pose a significant challenge. Upon assuming office, we immediately ramped up testing from conducting approximately 21 tests daily to 200 tests daily with a capacity of 2,000. This expansion allowed for the provision of a larger data sample to improve the Health Emergency Operations Centre's coordination and response to the pandemic. Our government has also strengthened disease surveillance through the use of the COVID-19 antigen-based rapid diagnostic tests, which offer point-of-care testing and near immediate results. 4 gene expert machines have been procured for $17.6 million to be deployed in regions 1, 6, 9, and 10, with expansion of testing facilities to regions 7 and 8 planned for 2021. Mr. Speaker, the health sector is adapting to the new reality of continual pandemic preparedness and heightened infection prevention and control. We have brought the Infectious Diseases Center to functionality, where we have treated 450 patients in the COVID-19 ward and 38 in the ICU. Additionally, as part of the ongoing COVID-19 response program, $2.1 billion was spent on critical items, including medical supplies, COVID-19 test kits, sanitizing materials, and personal protective equipment, or PPEs, as they are known. For 2021, government has made a provision of over $750 million to support the rolling out of COVID-19 vaccines from February. This, Mr. Speaker, will happen in a phased manner, but will cater first and foremost, as I mentioned earlier, to our frontline workers, the elderly and persons living with comorbidities. While government's ultimate aim is to promote vaccination towards achieving herd immunity before the end of 2021, mask wearing, sanitizing, and physical distancing continue to be critical to containing transmission. Mr. Speaker, the challenges of the pandemic also mean that we must reassess our treatment of non-communicable diseases. Persons suffering from chronic diseases such as diabetes, chronic respiratory diseases, and cardiovascular ailments are all at greater risk of mortality if they contract COVID-19. Our government's focus is on bringing to the forefront the prevention and curative aspects of chronic diseases, recognizing that screening for these diseases needs to be scaled up exponentially. In 2021, we have reoriented ourselves to increase our outreaches, to take healthcare and screening to communities, anticipating to reach at least 30,000 individuals as we endeavor to minimize the movement of people, which could exacerbate COVID-19 transmission. Mr. Speaker, we have also made a provision of $35 million for the establishment of a diabetic prevention and rehabilitation clinic at the Lusignan Health Center. With regards to HIV, we will intensify our partnerships with civil society organizations to encourage expanded testing and continued care, to ensure that persons living with the virus are able to remain on their antiretroviral treatment, thereby curbing transmission. For related treatment and testing, government has made a provision of $900 million. With respect to our national and international target to end the epidemic of malaria by the year 2030, we shall be undertaking a mass distribution of 135,000 long-lasting insecticidal nets, with emphasis on areas deemed most vulnerable, such as mining towns and their nearby environs. Mr. Speaker, we will also be dedicating more resources to address mental health issues, suicide prevention and care, and expand access to psychiatric and psychological services, including the resuscitation of these initiatives in our hinterland areas. Further, Mr. Speaker, we have allocated over $70 million to address the shortage of essential medication for psychiatric patients. Additionally, government will strive to ensure greater resilience and access to mental health services at a national level through the construction of an 18-bed mental health ward at the National Referral Hospital at a cost of $26 million. And also through the review and revision of the Mental Health Act of 1930, a sorely overlooked and outdated piece of legislation. I am sure, Honourable Minister, that you will have an opportunity to refer that bill to Special Select Committee when it comes before the House and propose amendments that you might deem suitable and appropriate. And I encourage you so to do. Mr. Speaker, the current state of infrastructure requires modernization and expansion, for which this budget is allocated. This is infrastructure still in health, for which this budget has allocated $2.8 billion. Within this sum, the continued implementation of the $860 million Smart Hospital Initiative will result in operationalization of the upgraded Leonora Hospital and the commissioning of the upgraded Diamond Diagnostic Center and the Mabaruma Hospital in 2021, while works will advance at Lethem and Paramakatoy. This initiative will lead to improved flow design and infection control under more improved energy efficiency, Government will also endeavor to complete the construction of a polyclinic at Festival City and the remodeling of the Skeldon Hospital, all at a combined cost of $88.3 million. As a result of this, Mr. Speaker, these facilities will now cater for surgical interventions, or this facility rather, will now cater for surgical interventions, including an operating room, recovery room, and an ICU, amongst others. Other areas that will benefit from capital investments focused on providing surgical interventions are Ashalton and Kumaka district hospitals, with over $100 million earmarked for these projects. Mr. Speaker, we are also currently examining the feasibility of establishing a maternal and child health hospital over the medium term. Still on maternal and child health, in a bid to strengthen our country's capacity to cope with the particular health needs of our mothers and children and reduce associated mortality rates, our government, this government, has committed in 2021 over $140 million towards the financing of maternal waiting homes and facilities at Moruca, Enmore, and Cato, as well as $100 million for the construction and retrofitting of the maternity ward and the maternity wing at the New Amsterdam Hospital. In the broader area of reproductive health, this administration intends to improve the coverage and range of family planning services, including wider contraceptive options and education and screening for gynecological, breast and prostate cancers. We will also be rolling out sexual and reproductive health policies, which will guide health sector interventions over the medium term. Mr. Speaker, with regard to ensuring improved elderly health, we will expand the package of services to now include a community nutrition program, expanded services offered at home visits, and specific clinic days for the elderly, amongst other things. I turn now, Mr. Speaker, to education. To develop a world-class education system, we intend to ensure equal access to quality education at all levels for all children, regardless of their background, to increase and improve the quality and quantity of trained teachers, learning resources and materials, and to increase the use of innovation and technology in order to improve education delivery and learning outcomes. Our government will intensify classroom monitoring to ensure we afford our teachers every opportunity to improve their pedagogical skills. Mr. Speaker, the state of the public education system inherited by our administration, to put it mildly, leaves much to be desired. The sector is plagued by inadequate supervision and lack of accountability within the levels, and this needs to be reversed immediately if we are to ensure that a well-balanced education is to be realized. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, learning outcomes continue to fluctuate, while the proportion of trained teachers across the sector, one of the core inputs to improved learning, has remained at approximately 71% since 2014. Furthermore, the pandemic has caused the public education system to reconfigure how it delivers its mandate to the people of Guyana. In 2021, Mr. Speaker, amounts totaling $60.7 billion have been budgeted for the education sector. The sector has moved to implement blended modalities to ensure learning continuity for all students, including a revamped Guyana Learning Channel Trust, benefiting over 130,000 students, and the distribution of printed worksheets and other materials to over 41,000 students in the hinterland, riverine, and disadvantaged coastal areas. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, almost 4,000 teachers were trained in the integration of innovation and ICT in their teaching learning process via the Pro Futuro online platform. Mr. Speaker, the immediate focus of our administration is pandemic preparedness, including the provision of PPEs for students and teachers, and retrofitting all schools with troughs, sinks, and water systems to provide a safe learning environment across all levels. Even as we adjust education delivery to a pandemic-sensitive modality, our goals for the sector in the medium term are set high. In order to deliver world-class education over the next 5 years, our administration plans to improve access with construction and equipping of nursery, primary, and secondary schools across the country with the necessary resources inclusive of quality teachers, updated curricula, and STEM laboratories worthy of a system comparable to international standards. In 2021, we will conduct a review and mapping exercise with a view to increasing the number of schools across the country. In the interim, we intend to commence with 2 secondary schools in Region 6 and Region 9. Additionally, we will commence work on a secondary school at Prospect, where I believe, Mr. Speaker, the sod was recently turned. This school will help address the growing demands on the east bank of the Marara. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the Abram-Zoul Secondary School will be reconstructed to provide necessary facilities for learners on the Essequibo Coast. An amount of $5.2 billion has been allocated for construction, rehabilitation, and maintenance of educational facilities countrywide. Mr. Speaker, in the area of teacher training and development, we found that our teacher training college has made no significant improvement over the past 5 years. It still functions based on traditions deeply steeped in time. If we are to modernize our national education system, one of the first steps we must take is to modernize the way our teachers are trained. Thus, our administration will ensure that the CPCE transforms to a fully online compatible modality, from application forms to tutorials to courses being offered online. Mr. Speaker, as the economy evolves, the education sector must be positioned and will be positioned to respond to the demands of the labor market. In recognition of this, the sector will aggressively intensify its efforts to increase enrollment in technical, vocational education and training institutions, as we endeavor to promote non-traditional forms of learning and lifelong learning. Mr. Speaker, an amount of $884 million has been allocated to equip and retool technical and vocational training centers. The University of Guyana will also be refashioned to better respond to the needs of a modernizing Guyana, including through its technological advancement to ensure learning materials and courses are made available online. Budget 2021 provides a total of $3.3 billion to finance the operations of the 2 campuses of the University of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, a hallmark of this People's Progressive Party civic government's vision for a top-tier education system is the establishment of an online learning institute that will deliver 20,000 scholarships over the next 5 years. In 2021, we plan to begin execution of this initiative, catering for the provision of over 4,500 scholarships through a multi-agency formulation that includes the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Public Service, and the Ministry of Labour. Mr. Speaker, government's collaboration with the Commonwealth of Learning and Coursera has already allowed us to offer more than 4,000 free online courses from various universities around the world to our people. Mr. Speaker, 64,605 citizens are benefiting from online courses offered by these two entities, of which to date, 8,481 participants are teachers who have since registered or participated in at least one course. Mr. Speaker, a sum of $1 billion is budgeted to support the online scholarships to be granted in 2021. Housing. Mr. Speaker, the evidence that home ownership is one of the fundamental pillars upon which the Guyanese dream is built is indisputable. Our party, the People's Progressive Party, has long recognized this and has pursued a policy of creating decent and affordable housing for all Guyanese. It is opportune for me to briefly remind this Honourable House that where once stood barren wastelands, marginal agricultural lands, and open underutilized pastures now stand thriving, booming, successful housing development schemes. A fitting tribute to successive visionary PPPC governments. Mr. Speaker, the bustling communities of Eccles, Providence, Diamond, Parfait Harmony, Good Hope, and Grove are just a few examples of these schemes that are now huge, bustling, and prosperous communities. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, this drive slowed and virtually came to a halt when new and misconceived notions pervaded the unimaginative thinking of the last 5 years. The model for housing development adopted then proved to be inadequate, inappropriate, and unattainable. This PPC administration must now refocus and has now refocused government's attention to provide for the welfare of our citizens by creating new housing stock and opening access to lands for housing development. Recall, sir, that we removed, as soon as we returned to office, the value-added tax on locally produced building and construction materials such as sand and stone and concrete blocks, plywood, logs, and lumber to enable Guyanese families to be able to afford their own homes. Mr. Speaker, in the housing sector, works are progressing apace to restore the lost vibrancy and vitality that once exemplified the sector. Before we demitted office in 2015, a total of 22,964 house lots had been allocated during our last 5 years in office. In contrast, Mr. Speaker, only 7,534 house lots were distributed during the APNU's 5 years in office. The slowdown in distribution of house lots under the APNU AFC administration was due to a lack of a clear vision or policy for the housing sector and capability. Mr. Speaker, this People's Progressive Party civic government's commitment, as reflected in our manifesto on the basis of which we were elected to office, is to make available and distribute 50,000 house lots across the country. The major partner in this exciting and evolving transformation will be the private sector and the household sector, who, together with government, will create the incentives and opportunities for affordable housing and invest their own domestic savings in order to realize the dream of owning their own home. Mr. Speaker, given our promise to the people of Guyana, we plan to allocate 10,000 house lots as well as distribute 7,000 land titles across the country in 2021. Additionally, government will construct 1,000 homes for low-income earners and young professionals as we strive to improve the standard of living of all Guyanese. Additionally, government has committed to the residents of Region 10 that they can look forward to the construction of 1,000 homes through public-private partnerships, with community involvement in every step of the way. The diaspora will also be engaged in financing housing initiatives and also benefit as migrant homeowners. In addition, Mr. Speaker, a single window approval system for construction permits will soon be reality, considerably reducing the processing time from land allocation to construction. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, we have budgeted $6 billion to further advance infrastructure and utility works in new and existing housing areas. Additionally, the sum of $1.5 billion is allocated to continue with infrastructure works in the Sophia, Diamond, and Parfait Harmony housing areas. In keeping with government's commitment of creating and enabling sustainable communities, the boundaries of this program will be extended to include Victoria on the east coast of Demerara. To this end, Mr. Speaker, the installation of LED street lamps and the upgrade of recreational facilities will all be a part of this program. Under the Core Home Support and Home Improvement Subsidy Initiative, government will be working towards providing subsidies to low-income households, and successful applicants will be given a new housing unit at a subsidized cost or materials to improve their homes. Mr. Speaker, our government continues to engage stakeholders to address issues of squatting and informal settlements by working to ensure that land is distributed in an equitable manner. We are facilitating the allocation of house lots to occupants of regularized squatter settlements and working with others to address the matter. Water and sanitation. Mr. Speaker, this administration aims to improve the water sector by increasing treated water coverage and access to potable water, reducing non-revenue water, and modernizing sanitation facilities across the country. Unfortunately, as we take stock of the existing situation in the sector, critical challenges and missteps were identified which persisted over the last 5 years. These included high iron content, low treated water coverage, high levels of non-revenue water, and a very low proportion of the hinterland population having access to potable water. We also found a sector that was burdening our vulnerable population, as VAT had been introduced on water consumption and the water subsidy for pensioners had been removed. Within 2 months after we took office, we ensured the reversal of these two draconian measures, benefiting all Guyanese, but more particularly our senior citizens. Mr. Speaker, this government will correct the deficiencies of the past 5 years. We will ensure that all Guyanese are provided with improved service. In this regard, the GWI has prepared a new 5-year strategic plan for the period 2021 to 2025. This plan is aligned with national priorities and advances the government's mission to provide clean, reliable, and affordable water. Emphasis will be placed on increasing access to treated water coverage to 90%, reduction of non-revenue water, the modernization of the sanitation infrastructure network, integrated water resource management, and wastewater treatment. Mr. Speaker, a sum of $4 billion has been allocated in 2021 to procure equipment and improve and expand the water supply systems across the country. Provision for the drilling of new wells, along with the upgrading of photovoltaic systems, storage facilities, distribution networks, and service connections across regions 1, 3, 7, 8, and 9. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the upgrading of distribution networks across regions 8 and 9 will be undertaken. To address the issue of non-revenue water, government has made a provision of $275 million in 2021 for the procurement and installation of 20,000 water meters for residential and business areas across the country. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, $200 million has been allocated to expand the Sophia, Eccles, Covent Garden, Grove, Friendship, and Virginujan water treatment plants to benefit over 50,000 residents. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, government will upgrade the transmission mains between Church to Cumming Streets and Cemetery Road to Mandela Avenue, benefiting over 35,000 residents. We have also allocated $100 million to procure electromechanical equipment for the rehabilitation of water production facilities. Mr. Speaker, on solid waste management, this government is committed to promoting integrated sanitation management through enhanced awareness on sanitation practices and solid waste management across the regions to safeguard human health and the environment. In 2021, we have budgeted $1.1 billion for this subsector, and we will undertake activities including the completion of the construction of Cell 1 at Hagsbush Sanitary Landfill Site and the upgrading of disposal sites at Rose Hall, Port Kaituma, Bellevue, Lethem, Lima, Charity, Luziknan, and the Edward. We have also catered for the preparation of temporary locations for waste disposal in regions 2, 3, and 5. Turning now, Mr. Speaker, to our youth. Mr. Speaker, this government has continually expressed the importance of our young people, our next generation of leaders. A signal moment after returning to office last year, was the re-establishment of a Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sport. Bringing it and its values, objectives and programs back from having been placed on a dusty backbench by the previous government. Mr. Speaker, every young person is entitled to be nurtured in a healthy, protective and supportive environment to develop their full potential. As such, in keeping with our promise to the people, His Excellency the President has established the Youth Advisory Council, which, as he indicated, will be at the heart of policy making. We expect the Council to be operationalized shortly. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, we have budgeted $90 million to expand the Youth Innovation Program of Guyana, which provides grants to young people across the country who successfully develop innovative solutions to address local issues and challenges. The program provides opportunities for youths to have access to and unlock innovative, creative, energetic, and bold talents, all within the context of our low-carbon economy in line with our new and expanded low-carbon development strategy. Mr. Speaker, government will also continue to generate opportunities for our youth to participate in the job market and in national development. In this regard, the government intends to improve access to education from nursery to university, as I've already discussed when I spoke on education just a few minutes ago. But in addition to that, the $820 million Youth Entrepreneurship and Apprenticeship Program will provide training and stipends for community service officers from 213 hinterland villages to create employment opportunities and generate income for young people in the development of their communities. Additionally, government has made provision through the Department of Youth of over $85 million to deliver youth-targeted training in areas such as robotics, oil and gas, climate change, the environment, information technology, and agro-processing. And we will establish a national job bank and labor exchange to improve access to employment opportunities for job seekers, including our youth. Culture, youth, culture, sports, and the arts. Mr. Speaker, this government is cognizant of the vast talents and skills of our people, which have gone underutilized and unappreciated or underappreciated, or indeed unappreciated and unutilized over the last 5 years. In this regard, we will aim to develop and showcase the potential of our sportsmen and women and artists, both at home and internationally. We will endeavor to create the enabling environment to increase income generation for the culture subsector through partnerships with the private sector for the creation of galleries, museums, dance schools in communities across the country. These initiatives are also intended to augment our drive to create niche tourism throughout our country, and for the culture inclusive of arts and sports programs. We have budgeted in 2021 sums totaling $2.7 billion. During last year, shortly after we assumed office, we hosted a One Guyana concert that showcased the culture of Guyana over a virtual platform, and which attracted over 500,000 online viewers. In 2021, we will develop a national cultural and creative industries policy to guide the development of the sector and reinstitute the advisory boards for the National Gallery of Art and the National Archives. The National Trust will also undertake to update their legislation in alignment with modern trends in heritage preservation and to support their expanded mandate. Mr. Speaker, in Budget 2021, we have allocated $30 million for grants to the cultural and creative industries, for which emphasis will be placed on original cultural and creative projects with a credible and well thought out plan for commercialization and sustainability. Additionally, over $120 million, a sum of over $120 million is budgeted for capital works in support of the advancement and preservation of culture and art, specifically to improve seating in the lower auditorium and sound and lighting systems at the National Cultural Center, to improve visitor experience at the Castellani House, to rehabilitate the dance studio of the National School of Dance, and to improve facilities elsewhere. A further $36 million is budgeted to upgrade heritage sites at Fort Nassau, the Dutch Heritage Museum, and the Indian Arrival Monument at Palmyra to improve facilities for the promotion of our rich and diverse history. Mr. Speaker, our government has budgeted $1.5 billion in 2021 to facilitate the development of sport across our country. Of this amount, $915.5 million is allocated for the improvement of community grounds countrywide, to expand their use as parks and create premium, multi-purpose sporting facilities of international standards, commencing in Regions 2, 6, and 10. Other important improvements include the installation of lights on community grounds, laying of synthetic tracks, and upgrading of other sports facilities. The sum of $618 million will be used to help host tournaments, maintain sports facilities, and support sports associations. Of this amount, $320 million is budgeted towards professional training of athletes and coaches as part of the Sports Academy program. Turning now, Mr. Speaker, to our senior citizens. Our senior citizens aged 65 and over currently represent 6.2% of our population, and by 2024, this group is expected to increase to 7.2%. Our government's attention to their welfare is heightened, especially now, in light of their vulnerability to COVID-19. By 2025, our elderly will enjoy better health, improved social safety net programs, and increased disposable incomes. Mr. Speaker, upon taking office in 2020, our government reinstituted the water subsidy to our citizens, as a result of which, Mr. Speaker, 28,270 senior citizens have benefited thus far. I am pleased to say, too, that as soon as we returned to office, we announced our intention to increase the old age pension in keeping with our manifesto promise, and that promise has already been delivered. Mr. Speaker, our government has prioritized improved services to our senior citizens, with a focus on chronic diseases aimed at decreasing comorbidities in the medium term and reducing non-communicable diseases, such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and hypertension, which affect many of our senior citizens. We have taken steps to strengthen the delivery of healthcare services, and our senior citizens will have improved access to primary healthcare services and drugs and medical supplies. With effect from March 2021, we expect that some private payment outlets will provide additional options for pensions to cash their old age pension. Our government has commenced direct delivery and payment to shut-in pensioners, including persons living with disabilities, with 3,400 persons benefiting to date. Moreover, our government will continue to support and improve the care facilities for our senior citizens. Persons with disabilities. Mr. Speaker, this government will champion and support the rights of persons with disabilities. In 2021, the Persons with Disability Act will be reviewed and amended. We will continue to deliver key services to this vulnerable group who are at risk of being discriminated against. As part of our government's charge to ensuring that persons throughout Guyana are given equal opportunities to access a complete range of healthcare services, in 2021, optometry services will be expanded to regions 2, 6, 7, and 9 through the public healthcare system. Mr. Speaker, for the first time, there will be rehabilitation professionals stationed in each region. We will strengthen the provision of medical and therapeutic care, vocational and skills training programs, and the creation of jobs through private sector partnerships. Further, Mr. Speaker, a sum of $50 million has been allocated to the National Commission on Disability, even as we increase resource allocations to the disability and rehabilitation services within the Ministry of Health. More importantly, government will embark on the construction of a complex valued at $30 million at Mahaika that will provide training to disabled persons in the areas of life and vocational skills. In addition, Mr. Speaker, this budget allocates an amount of $120 million for programs, for special programs supporting the community of persons with disabilities. Victims of domestic violence. Mr. Speaker, our government is extremely concerned with the level of domestic violence and its impact on victims and their families. We took immediate action to address this issue on multiple fronts, and we will continue to collaborate with communities, faith-based and non-government organizations to pursue actions that curtail domestic and sexual abuse in our country. We have significantly increased allocations to the organizations providing support to victims of domestic violence, including Help and Shelter, who will receive over $50 million this year. In addition, we will be developing multi-sector domestic violence protocols, which will serve to improve the operational procedures across relevant public and private institutions and stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, our government launched the 914 toll-free hotline to allow victims of domestic violence to report incidents and request assistance in December 2020. This is being complemented by the $1 billion Spotlight program, which will see government working along with stakeholders, including international agencies and the CSOs, towards curbing gender-based violence. We will establish a court superintendent department with a cadre of lawyers to lead prosecutions in each regional division for cases of domestic violence. A survivors advocates program will also be implemented to offer emotional support and crisis counseling to victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse, and will be piloted in the region, and will be piloted in those regions with the highest reported cases. Mr. Speaker, we must collectively show zero tolerance for any form of domestic violence. Amerindian and hinterland development. Mr. Speaker, by the time we demitted office in 2015, we had already set in train planned interventions to issue several new certificates of titles for Amerindian villages. 12 certificates of titles had already been issued by us between 2014 and the time we left office. This is in stark comparison to the dismal performance of the previous administration, who from 2016 to the time they lost office, reluctantly issued only 2 certificates of title to our Amerindian brothers and sisters. And Mr. Speaker, I am in fact being corrected that it is in fact not two, but one, an even greater shame, if I may say so. Mr. Speaker, since our government resumed office, we spent the last few months of 2020 preparing the groundwork for re-energizing the Amerindian land title program to achieve its original target to title 68 villages. To this end, Budget 2021 allocates $630 million to expedite the granting of titles to Amerindian villages. Mr. Speaker, if I may return to a matter to which I alluded earlier, severe hardships were meted out to our hinterland communities when almost 2,000 CSOs were unceremoniously fired, and the stipend of $30,000 monthly, approved by the People's Progressive Party Civic when in government, was discontinued. In keeping with our manifesto promise of delivering better government services to our Amerindian brothers and sisters, we have, in only 4 months of assuming office, resuscitated the CSO program by re-engaging over 500 CSOs, providing them with the previously established stipend of $30,000 monthly. We've also trained 46 CSOs in ICT skills, returning support to the development of once neglected Amerindian communities. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to create employment opportunities for our Amerindian brothers and sisters to promote capacity development. To this end, this government will employ 2,000 CSOs, maintaining our manifesto promise to the First Peoples of Guyana. We will support economic activity in their villages, including by support for purchasing of boats, engines, and other inputs into generating economic activity. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we will invest $1.75 billion for the Hinterland Roads program to enhance connectivity and access. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we will award 196 scholarships, bridging the educational disparities between starting to bridge the educational disparities between the hinterland and coastal areas. Improved governance and institutional reforms. Governance. Mr. Speaker, the overarching commitment by President Ali's administration to democracy, inclusive governance, transparency, and accountability lays the foundation for the manner in which our government will operate. Our President has committed to pursue nation building through a One Guyana policy based on inclusivity, as elaborated during his inaugural address to this Honorable House only yesterday. After the last 5 years of reversals, our government has the welcome task of returning Guyana to its days of former glory under the previous People's Progressive Party civic government. It is not a secret that our predecessors failed as a government, and we are here on this side of the aisle to prove it. As we set out on the medium-term trajectory for our governance agenda, we will seek to ensure greater participation of all Guyanese in our plans for the development of our country. We will focus on making this Parliament a truly deliberative forum, and we will work further to protect and preserve Guyana's Constitution and the standing orders of this noble House. We all know that this was severely trampled in the last session, with no special select committee. However, since our return to office, 2 bills have been sent to committees for consultations with stakeholders. It is noteworthy that all parliamentary standing committees have been established, and most notably, the Constitutional Reform Committee and the Committee of Appointments are meeting. Further, Mr. Speaker, the latter has completed the process for the parliamentary nominee to the Judicial Service Commission, which expired since September 2017. Mr. Speaker, we are proud of these achievements in a mere 6 months. However, when we contrast the affairs of the Public Accounts Committee, regrettably, this committee is still held to ransom and has not met for the past 2 weeks, preventing the committee from getting on with the business of the people and preventing scrutiny of the previous administration's woeful mismanagement of the finances of Guyana during the past 5 years.
No scaling fences.
Mr. Speaker, with ongoing preparations for an active legislative agenda, as further outlined in His Excellency's address to this Honourable House, a number of oversight measures to enhance transparency and accountability will be rolled out, including, Mr. Speaker, the establishment of a One Guyana Commission enshrined in statute. Yet another example, Mr. Speaker, of efforts being made by this government to entrench a strong foundation for democratic rule and inclusive governance. Turning now to justice sector reform and strengthening. Mr. Speaker, our government is firmly committed to ensuring that all citizens have access to and are protected by the justice system. To this end, we will continue to implement reforms to the criminal justice system, as well as to advance reforms to the legal system more broadly. The previous PPPC government had commenced addressing the issue of backlog cases in the High Court. However, sir, it would appear that these gains were not sustained, resulting in serious implications both for the justice system as well as the security sector. Over the medium term, we will reprioritize the issue of reducing backlog cases, with particular emphasis on cases at the Court of Appeal. Additionally, it is important to recognize that the COVID-19 pandemic has also placed additional pressures on the limited capacity of the justice sector, including the fact arising from the fact that there have been reports that the pandemic has brought more disruptions with families, and incidents of domestic violence have taken on new proportions. Mr. Speaker, to advance all of the reforms earmarked for this sector, the sum of $4.6 billion is allocated for 2021. A sum of $1.2 billion for the construction and equipping of new courtrooms, as well as living quarters, supporting facilities at locations including Port Kaituma, Mabaruma, and Vigilance. This will reduce travel time and cost for citizens requiring the services of the courts and enhance access to justice. Mr. Speaker, in an innovative response, container courtrooms were established to conduct virtual courts at the Lusignan prisons, all in an effort to align with safety measures instituted in our fight against COVID-19 and to harness modern technology in the delivery of services. These initiatives and examples will soon be replicated at other locations. In addition, Mr. Speaker, more courts are expected to be opened, including along the heavily populated East Bank corridor. The chambers of the Director of Public Prosecutions will benefit from expanded office space to house more prosecutors who are currently unable to be hired because of lack of office space. An additional 10 legal staff will be hired, which will allow the DPP to address a larger caseload over a shorter period of time and address the current backlog. We will procure a software to better manage cases through their entire process. In addition, over $100 million is earmarked for the maintenance of infrastructure and buildings for Supreme Court and the DPP's chambers, which together will serve to ensure that improved physical facilities are available. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, the long-awaited Law Reform Commission will be established, charting the way to advance its work. In addition, the activities under the Support for Criminal Justice System program will unfold after a period of stagnation under the previous government. A sum of $325 million is budgeted this year for interventions including strengthening of probation services and legal aid. Further, we've initiated a program with the University of Guyana, which will see our law graduates who are unable to attend the Hugh Wooding Law School being trained to prosecute alongside public and police prosecutors. These candidates will be deployed to courthouses throughout Guyana, augmenting the current complement of prosecutors and thereby reducing the time taken to administer related legal services. Strengthening local government. Mr. Speaker, over the past 5 years, a spate of financial irregularities has plagued the local government organs alongside weak oversight and poor management of local government systems. Our administration will right these wrongs.
Yes. It will.
Already, our government has signaled our strong commitment to maintain the legal and regulatory framework for the system of local administration through the development of local organs. To this end, the local democratic organs will benefit from technical support to perform their roles and functions, as well as to enhance leadership and capacity development for the provision of quality services in all the communities across the country. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, government has allocated the sum of $552 million to strengthen the LDOs across the 70 NDCs and 10 municipalities to provide efficient services and to undertake developmental works for the residents within their boundaries. Further, an amount of $1.1 billion is allocated for community enhancement workers to continue to enable a clean and safe environment for residents within the NDCs. In addition, a sum of $172 million is provided for capacity development, institutional strengthening, and infrastructural works for the LDOs, including the rehabilitation of Parika, Charity, and Monrepo markets. Public administration and public financial management. Mr. Speaker, revenue management. The Guyana Revenue Authority, in its quest to deliver a modern and effective revenue administration, has responded to the needs of its taxpayers during the period of the COVID-19 pandemic. The GRA has introduced numerous process amendments to reduce the influx of taxpayers to its office. Additionally, Asecuda World software was successfully implemented, which allows for online submissions of declarations and e-payments, yet another example of the use of modern technology for delivery of government services. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, the GRA will pursue a number of initiatives to improve the delivery of its services, including the implementation of additional non-intrusive methods of customs examinations, very importantly, the implementation of the single window software, expanding e-payment facilities, completion of the rollout of the remaining Asecuda models, and first phase rollout of the optimal software, which is a powerful and flexible solution that brings together taxpayer information, transaction, and communications within one single integrated user-friendly system. The GRA has also continued to build capacity to address the emerging and unique needs of the oil and gas sector. This has resulted in the establishment of a customs petroleum unit within the Customs, Excise and Trade Department and a Petroleum Revenue Department, also in the GRA. Mr. Speaker, it is imperative that the GRA's capacity to monitor and audit the oil and gas sector be ramped up substantially. To this end, in 2021, training will be delivered in areas such as interpreting and analyzing financial statements, oil and gas international financial reporting standards, cost recovery procedures, computer-assisted audit tools, and international taxation. The National Insurance Scheme. Mr. Speaker, it is well known that successive actuarial studies conducted over the years on the National Insurance Scheme have highlighted the need for significant reforms to address issues related to the viability of the scheme. Many of these reforms require serious review and consideration, and these issues are not new. They have been around and they have been documented in successive actuarial reports. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is the long-term viability of the National Insurance Scheme faces very serious threat. In 2021, our government will undertake a comprehensive assessment of the recommendations made to determine a way forward. But, Mr. Speaker, even as we undertake these analytical reviews, we must ensure that the NIS addresses the operational inefficiencies that currently obtain. Far too numerous complaints have been made constantly by contributors over the years regarding quality of service provision, missing documentation and records, and incomplete contributions. The scheme must ensure that these concerns are addressed with the utmost urgency. Contributor records must be updated promptly and accurately. Government has tasked the scheme to come up with a special project to address these operational issues, and work in this regard has already commenced. Our priority is to ensure that the NIS brings all contributor records up to date and that they receive their benefits in a timely manner. In this regard, the scheme is to be commended for taking a step in using technology. In particular, the scheme introduced recently the option for pensioners, NIS pensioners, to submit their life certificates via WhatsApp. Since then, several pensioners have been using the WhatsApp facility, calling the WhatsApp hotline, making video calls, and submitting their life certificates live on their, via the WhatsApp video call. We urge the embrace of more technological solutions, some of which, like this particular example, need not involve large sums of money or complex technology, but in fact can use simple and readily available technology applied to the particular problem in hand. Public procurement. Mr. Speaker, on assuming office, government quickly realized that much of the public procurement systems, processes, and procedures instituted prior to 2015 had been dismantled. Constant and persistent complaints abound regarding excessive delays and slow processing of tender awards, much to the detriment and slothful implementation of the public sector investment program, and indeed, much to the frustration of competing bidders. This situation has to be addressed. This situation has to be arrested immediately. And this PPPC government has taken decisive action to restore public confidence and reliability in the tender process. To this end, the National Procurement and Tender Administration Board will take a number of steps to improve transparency and accountability, including by developing a new website to provide information on procurement opportunities, as well as to publish tender awards as required by the Procurement Act. We will reintroduce standard bidding documents, enforce the requirement to prepare and publish procurement plans, reactivate bid protest procedures, and live stream tender openings. The NPTAB will also collaborate with the Public Procurement Commission to review the Procurement Act and regulations and make recommendations for improvement, paving the way for e-procurement and digital submission of tenders. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the NPTAB will more stringently enforce compliance with the requirements of the Act by all budget agencies, as well as provide training to evaluators, bidders, and all individuals. Data systems strengthening. Mr. Speaker, we place the highest importance on data-driven policymaking. Recognizing the importance of good quality and timely data, we will be taking steps to strengthen the Bureau of Statistics and the statistical departments of the various line ministries where they exist. One immediate example where action will be taken to update our statistical framework is in the area of our national accounts. Given the rapidly changing structure of the Guyanese economy as we become an oil and gas producer, it will become unavoidably necessary for us to rebase our national accounts to a more recent and suitable base year, and so that we are better able to measure value-added output in our country. I turn now, Mr. Speaker, to foreign relations. Our government's return to office has seen the restoration of Guyana's credibility in the international arena. Since this administration took office in August 2020, our president has participated in several international events. His interventions have signaled the importance with which our government views Guyana's role in the international community. His advocacy for the sustained economic development of small states, now with the global pandemic challenging such development, and the need to work collectively to build resilience, are calls that have elevated Guyana's presence on the world stage. Mr. Speaker, the preservation of Guyana's sovereignty and territorial integrity remains paramount. On December 18, 2020, the International Court of Justice ruled that it has jurisdiction in the case that Guyana brought in March 2018, following the decision of the Secretary General of the United Nations that the court was the next means to be used as the solution for the controversy that arose out of Venezuela's contention that the arbitral award of 1899 that had settled the land frontier between then British Guyana and Venezuela was null and void. The ICJ will now proceed to adjudicate the case on its merits. This means that the court will issue, after considering written and oral submissions of the parties, a final and legally binding decision resolving the controversy that has affected Guyana's relations with Venezuela since independence. Our government will not compromise, diminish, or undermine the singularity, sanctity, or solemnity of these proceedings, and will therefore fully participate in and adhere to the court's final decision. We know that all parties represented in this hallowed assembly are at one in this national endeavor. Our government therefore looks forward to us all going forward together as we continue to demonstrate to the world that we are at one in our fight to ensure that Guyana's sovereignty and territorial integrity are preserved and maintained. In the national fight to combat the global pandemic, the government has also received much support from our bilateral and multilateral partners, which must be acknowledged. Mr. Speaker, to advance Guyana's interests worldwide, we've allocated $3.9 billion in Budget 2021 for our missions and consulates to promote Guyana's foreign policy. We will continue to consolidate our relationships with our traditional development partners and forge the building of new relationships. In this regard, we'll be strengthening our diplomatic presence in the Middle East with the establishment of 2 missions in Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to strengthening relations with the diaspora, and we are aggressively pursuing their involvement in Guyana's development agenda. As you would have heard from His Excellency the President in his speech to the Parliament yesterday, his government is in the process of establishing a diaspora council to ensure that the objective of engaging our diaspora in a structured manner is realized. We're also working to create a one-stop shop for Guyanese overseas to engage in trade and investment through collaboration with the Guyana Office for Investment. And in 2021, it is expected that a virtual diaspora conference will be held after the finalization of the diaspora engagement strategy and plan of action. Public safety and security. Mr. Speaker, the security sector has long been plagued by issues of lack of public trust, poor response times, and inefficient resource allocation. Our administration immediately undertook, upon assuming office, to equip the sector to improve its ability to deliver on its mandate. We will ensure that every citizen, individuals and the businesses, and every visitor to our country should enjoy a safe and secure environment. Mr. Speaker, a sum of $15.3 billion has been allocated to the Guyana Police Force, of which $300 million is to be spent on expansion of the land and water fleet across the regions to complement the existing fleet. Mr. Speaker, in the past, we had found community policing groups to be a very effective complement to the work being done by the Guyana Police Force, and involved in the community in helping to keep their neighborhoods safe and secure. Regrettably, over the past 5 years, Mr. Speaker, the community policing program was dismantled. In 2021, we will be resuscitating the community policing group. And to this end, an amount of $95 million has been allocated to help those groups strengthen neighborhood patrols and visibility. Over $830 million has been allocated for the construction, rehabilitation, and maintenance of police stations, including Providence, Ramveld, Cove and John, Albion, Wim, Parika, Wisma, and others. We also plan to improve investigative and forensic capabilities of ranks by conducting training in 20 courses for 828 police ranks, along with ongoing overseas training. Turning to the Guyana Prison Service, major works are ongoing to upgrade prison infrastructure. Work will commence this year on constructing 3 new blocks at Lusiknan, which will accommodate 600 inmates, while works are also progressing on the cells at New Amsterdam Prison. Additionally, the construction of the Mazruni Prison to accommodate 220 high-profile inmates is expected to be completed during 2021. A sum of $50 million will be expended towards training of inmates in areas such as anger management, literacy, agriculture, and culinary arts. Additionally, 30 incarcerated youths will benefit from digital skills training to support rehabilitation and social transformation upon exit from the prison system. To finance these and all other initiatives, an amount of $5 billion is earmarked for the prison service. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, the Guyana Fire Service will receive a total of $1.9 billion.
Very good.
Major interventions will include relocation of the central fire station at the congested Stabroek Market and construction of a new fire station at Eccles. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, 6 water tenders and 2 ambulances will be procured. Mr. Speaker, I turn now to our macroeconomic targets for 2021. Real GDP. Mr. Speaker, Guyana's real GDP is projected to grow by 20.9% in 2021, with the non-oil economy growing by 6.1%, a significant reversal of the 7.3% contraction in 2020. This is premised, of course, on the assumption that a reopening of the economy takes place with COVID-19 restrictions being gradually lifted and is therefore subject to significant downside risks. On the sectoral front, Mr. Speaker, agriculture, forestry, and fishing. This sector, responding to the policy environment created, is expected to expand by 5.6%. The restructuring of Gaisuco, along with the recapitalization of sugar estates, will see some improvement in production and productivity. As a result, the sugar industry is projected to grow by 9.6%. The rice growing industry is forecasted to expand by 3.5%. Forestry, livestock, other crops, and fishing are also expected to see major improvements. In the case of forestry, Mr. Speaker, responding to the policy environment that we have created, this sector is projected to grow by 18.5% in 2021. Extractive sector. Mr. Speaker, the mining and quarrying sector is forecasted to grow by 39.1% in 2021. Significantly, Mr. Speaker, this is driven by growth across all industries: oil, gold, bauxite, and other mining and quarrying. In the oil and gas subsector, the daily rate of production for 2021 is expected to be just over 109,000 barrels of oil per day. On that basis, this subsector is projected to grow by 46.7% in 2021. The gold mining subsector, which also suffered setbacks in 2020, is expected to grow by 4.2% in 2021, largely due to the resumption of operations at the one large-scale gold mine, which had suffered a stoppage in 2020, but also reflecting the response of this medium and small miners to the policy environment that this government has created. Mr. Speaker, the bauxite subsector, which faced major issues in 2020, is expected to recover in 2021. Similarly, other mining and quarrying subsectors, which saw a significant contraction in 2020 as a result of lower demand, is projected to recover and grow by 19.8% in 2021, particularly with the anticipated scaling up of construction activities, resulting in significant increases in the production of construction materials such as sand and stone. Manufacturing. Mr. Speaker, the performance of the manufacturing sector is projected to improve by 7.3% in 2021 partly on account of anticipated growth in sugar, but also rice and other manufacturing. These three subsectors are expected to grow by 9.6%, 8.7%, and 6.2%, respectively. Construction. Mr. Speaker, with the resumption and expansion of public sector construction through the Public Sector Investment Program, along with the rapid growth that is expected in private sector investment in key infrastructural projects, the construction sector is projected to grow at a very respectable 9.1% in 2021. Services. Mr. Speaker, significant improvements are anticipated for 2021. These would follow the phased reopening of the economy, and an overall growth rate of 5% is projected for the services sector. This is largely driven by anticipated recoveries in wholesale and retail trade, transport and storage, and financial and insurance activities. These are projected to grow by 10%, 9.9%, and 7%, respectively. Monetary policy and inflation. Mr. Speaker, monetary policy will be aimed at maintaining price and exchange rate stability and expansion in private sector credit. For the year 2021, inflation is projected at 1.6%, due to expectations of increased economic activity as COVID-19 restrictions are lifted progressively, with concomitant effects on commodity prices. Balance of payments. Mr. Speaker, the overall balance of payments is expected to register a lower surplus in 2021 amounting to $59.9 million compared with $60.6 million in 2020. The current account is expected to move from a deficit of $651 million to a surplus of $65.7 million, mainly due to projected higher export earnings driven by a combination of higher export volumes and prices of export commodities. Export receipts are projected to increase by 46.4% to $3,788.8 million. This reflects projected higher export earnings from all commodities, but in particular, crude oil exports are projected to increase by over $1 billion. Mr. Speaker, the capital account is expected to move from a surplus of $720 million to a deficit of $5.8 million, reflecting higher projected outflows of private enterprises, despite projected increased foreign direct investment. Mr. Speaker, I turn now to the fiscal operations of the non-financial public sector, targets for the non-financial public sector, central government. Total central government current revenue for 2021, net of inflows from the Guyana Red Plus Investment Fund, popularly called GRIF, is estimated at $257.9 billion, 13.4% above 2020 collections. Tax revenue collections are projected to grow by $23.8 billion to reach $242.1 billion in 2021, and non-tax revenues by $6.8 billion to an estimated $15.8 billion. The 2021 tax revenue outlook is on account of an anticipated 8.4% increase in income taxes as a result of intensified activity in the private sector. Withholding tax, largely driven by remittances from companies involved in the extraction of crude oil, is expected to grow by 13.9% or $4.6 billion above 2020. Expansion is also expected from collections of customs and trade taxes, which are estimated to grow by $3.3 billion to $24.6 billion in 2021. Collections from excise taxes and VAT are targeted at $40.1 billion and $53.6 billion, respectively. Non-tax revenues are estimated to grow by 74.7% in 2021 on account of higher collections of royalties, special transfers, and Bank of Guyana profits. Mr. Speaker, central government total expenditure for 2021 is projected to reach $366.9 billion, 12.7% above the $325 billion spent in 2020, driven mainly by an anticipated increase in expenditure for an intensified public sector investment program. Non-interest current expenditure is targeted at $256.7 billion, or 6.2% above the amounts expended in 2020. This is driven primarily by growth in transfer payments and employment costs of $9.1 billion and $7.7 billion, respectively. The higher anticipated transfer payments are largely due to a significant increase of $2.6 billion allocated for educational grants to nursery, primary, and secondary school students across the country. In addition, subsidies and contributions to local organizations, as well as old age pensions and social assistance, are expected to increase also. Mr. Speaker, capital expenditures projected to expand to $103.2 billion, 35.6% above the amount expended in 2020. This is attributed to advancement of major infrastructure projects. Mr. Speaker, the overall deficit of the central government is projected to be 8.7% of GDP, compared with 9.4% at the end of 2020. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to inform this Honorable House that the size of Budget 2021 is $383.1 billion Guyana dollars, Guyana's largest budget ever. And, Mr. Speaker, it is financed with no new taxes. Public enterprises. Mr. Speaker, public enterprise receipts are anticipated to increase by 25.7% to $146.8 billion in 2021. This outlook could be attributed mainly to higher expected receipts at GPL, driven partly by government interventions to clear arrears, to which I alluded earlier, and to the Guyana Oil Company, who are projecting a 17% increase in sales volumes. Mr. Speaker, the deficit of the non-financial public sector is projected at $100.9 billion, or 9.8% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, I turn now to measures. In addition to the wide range of public investment projects and initiatives announced earlier, all of which will stimulate economic activity, create jobs, and generate incomes, Budget 2021 also proposes additional measures aimed at bringing relief to the many businesses and households that have been experiencing financial distress over the past year and beyond. These measures also deliver targeted interventions aimed at specific sectors and spheres of activity that are particularly important, both to households and businesses. First, Mr. Speaker, reducing the cost of basic food and other household items. 1, restoring the value-added tax zero rate on basic food items and household necessities. Mr. Speaker, during the PPPC's prior tenure in government, an extensive list of basic necessities were zero-rated so as to ensure that the VAT did not lead to an increase in the cost of these goods and services or become burdensome on taxpayers. The APNU over AFC, over their term in office, moved a number of these items from the zero-rated category to either the standard-rated or exempt category. Mr. Speaker, in fulfillment of another one of our manifesto promises, we will restore to the zero-rated status all of the food items and other basic household necessities that were previously zero-rated at the time we demitted office in 2015.
Promise delivered.
Mr. Speaker, another promise delivered. These items include basic wheat and flour, basic breads, oats, unflavored cracker biscuits, cooking oil, locally produced bed linen like bed sheets and pillowcases, toothbrushes, etc. Still on the category of reducing the cost of basic food and other household items, reducing water tariffs. Mr. Speaker, water is essential to all aspects of our daily lives, both at the residential and commercial level. I wish to announce a 5% reduction in water tariffs across the board, targeting all levels of consumers. Next, Mr. Speaker, reducing the cost of construction and home ownership. Mr. Speaker, as I have indicated during the course of my earlier presentation, the construction sector is a key sector and contributor to our economic development. Along with the significant developments that we will see taking place within the sector over the medium term, this People's Progressive Party civic government has committed to providing 10,000 house lots annually. We have worked tirelessly to clear the backlog of applications and to promote home ownership across the country while providing access to financing, recognizing as we do how important home ownership is to the economic empowerment of individuals and of families. Mr. Speaker, to aid the achievement of this vision of home ownership for all Guyanese, we are proposing to zero-rate the value-added tax for the following items: stone imported for construction and housing from CARICOM. It will be recalled, Mr. Speaker, that our government had previously zero-rated this with a sunset clause expiring at the end of June 2021. We are now extending the zero-rated status until further notice. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, locally produced pre-stressed concrete piles. Thirdly, locally fabricated mild steel beams for building construction. And many of these, Mr. Speaker, even if they don't affect home construction, they will nevertheless affect the cost of construction in the business sector. Fourthly, Mr. Speaker, and this is of particular relevance and interest to home construction, locally manufactured roofing and PVC products for building construction. Mr. Speaker, we will also continue to monitor the cost of other basic construction materials such as cement and steel, and examine the possibility of applying relevant taxes in such a manner as to serve as an adjuster from time to time to cushion the impact of imported price fluctuation. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, as another boost to the construction sector, we are proposing to reduce the duty on industrial-grade cement from 15% to 5%. In addition, Mr. Speaker, in relation to the ceiling on low-income mortgage loans, Mr. Speaker, it would be recalled that we announced last year an increase from $8 million to $10 million in the ceiling on low-income housing loans that may be obtained through commercial banks under the Low-Income Housing Loans Program supported by this government. I thought that was a necessary qualifier. Mr. Speaker, this year, we would like to announce a further increase in that ceiling from $10 million to $12 million, which will make housing loans more affordable to borrowers within that range. I might add, Mr. Speaker, that we will also, in due course, examine the appropriateness of extending this program to include other financial institutions, such as insurance companies, depending on the legal framework. Members of this Honourable House would be aware that the framework currently applies to commercial banks that have been designated an approved mortgage finance company by way of order issued under the Income Tax Act. Next, Mr. Speaker, ceiling for housing loans at the New Building Society. Mr. Speaker, the New Building Society has been an important source of financing for home construction and home ownership over the years. Currently, the ceiling on loans that the NBS can grant is $12 million. We are proposing to approve an increase in the ceiling to $15 million. This will enable borrowers desirous of borrowing in that range to access financing more affordably from the NBS. Next, Mr. Speaker, reducing the cost of connectivity. Mr. Speaker, our government has been proactive in working with stakeholders in the diffusion of ICT across all sectors and regions of Guyana as a means of economic and social empowerment for our citizens. The swift liberalization of our telecommunications sector and the ensuing benefits that competition has brought through lower prices and a push to improve services have delivered on the initial step of our promise and vision for enhanced ICT services. To continue along this path, government is proposing to remove the value-added tax on data for residential and individual use. Reducing the cost of transportation in the hinterland. Mr. Speaker, in our 2020 budget, the value-added tax, VAT, was removed from ATVs for mining, forestry, agriculture, and manufacturing. To further reduce the cost of transportation for hinterland communities and operators, the government will remove the duty on ATVs for use in the hinterland. Supporting our school children. Mr. Speaker, the APNU-AFC government during their tenure effectively demolished the social safety nets that were put in place by the PPPC government, which had sought to protect the most vulnerable in our society. In our 2020 budget, the PPPC has already begun to take steps to undo these misdeeds. Budget 2020 also announced a number of initiatives to be implemented from 2021. As promised last year, we will be introducing a cash grant of $15,000 per child to be given to the parents of children in the nursery, primary, and secondary schools in the public school system, supporting the elderly. Also, as promised in Budget 2020, we will be increasing old age pensions from $20,500 to $25,000 with effect from January 1, 2021. This will benefit over 60,000 persons and put an additional $4 billion of disposable income in their hands. Mr. Speaker, I now wish to announce that we will also be raising the public assistance payment from $9,000 to $12,000 monthly, benefiting over 13,000 vulnerable persons and providing an additional $500 million in disposable income to these individuals. Capital gains tax. Mr. Speaker, at the time that we demitted office, no capital gains tax was payable on assets that were owned for over 25 years. In 2019, the APNU-AFC changed this policy and abolished the 25-year limit. We are proposing to reinstate the original position, whereby the sale of assets that were owned for more than 25 years will not attract capital gains tax on their disposal. Finally, Mr. Speaker, restoring government's zero-rated status. To reduce the cost of government delivery of goods and services, we will restore the zero-rated status for VAT purposes that the government previously had in relation to the importation of goods and services, or rather in relation to the importation of goods and works and services purchased by a budget agency. Let me say that again, Mr. Speaker. In relation, this applies to budget agencies, government ministries and agencies. In relation to budget agencies listed under the in the schedule to the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act. So this is a status that will be enjoyed only by budget agencies listed in the schedule to the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act. Those agencies will have their zero-rated status restored in relation to the following: in relation to goods when imported and works and services purchased by them. Mr. Speaker, the annualized cost of the measures we introduced last year exceeded $40 billion on an annualized basis. The further measures we are introducing this year are expected to cost an additional $10 billion. Taken together, Mr. Speaker, that puts in the hands of the citizens of Guyana an additional $50 billion of disposable income. Mr. Speaker, I will conclude as I began. This budget comes to this House at a time of extraordinary challenge, both to our country and to the global community in which we live. But it also comes to this honorable House at a time when Guyana faces epic opportunity. Mr. Speaker, the choice is ours, whether we wish to be weighed down by the challenges before us or to be buoyed by the opportunities before us. This People's Progressive Party civic government has charted a course outlined in our manifesto and elaborated by His Excellency the President that, once followed, will see us seizing those opportunities and will guide us to a destiny of which our foreparents have dreamt for generations. The task will not be easy, but neither is it impossible. One thing, Mr. Speaker, is sure: the task will be made considerably easier if we have all hands on deck, embracing the very spirit of oneness so eloquently elaborated by His Excellency the President yesterday. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 outlines a set of policies, programs, and projects which will not only catalyze economic growth directly, but will also see billions of US dollars of private investment realized across several sectors of the economy. Over and beyond oil and gas, the opportunities in agriculture, in tourism and hospitality, in manufacturing, in the service sector. And this is why I belabored the developments in each one of these sectors as I addressed them in the substantive body of this budget speech, really to make the point that each one of these sectors holds remarkable promise for the future of Guyana. Over and beyond oil and gas, all of these sectors are pointing to remarkable investment opportunities and tens of thousands of jobs being created in the shortest space of time. These jobs translate into incomes, and those incomes translate into prosperity, both at an individual level and inevitably at a national level. Mr. Speaker, the choice is ours, each of us at an individual level, whether to stand aside and be a passive spectator as Guyana navigates this exciting phase in its history, or whether to get on board and be an active participant in the making of this modern history. That choice, Mr. Speaker, is ours. But make no mistake of it, this is the moment for which generations of Guyanese have been waiting. This is the moment. We call on you on that side of the House to join hands with us, even if you are not occupying your seat today. We call on you on that side of the House to join hands with us. And of course, no disrespect intended to the distinguished Deputy Speaker. We call on you to join hands with us as we seize this moment and chart a course through the challenges of today, and there will be challenges, into an era of economic dynamism and secure lasting and resilient prosperity for all Guyanese for generations to come. Mr. Speaker, before I close, permit me only to acknowledge the tremendous efforts made by all of my colleagues in the Cabinet and their respective staff who exerted tremendous effort in preparing their respective budget submissions. And yes, I think a round of applause is eminently deserving. Permit me also to acknowledge the contributions and submissions made by so many stakeholders throughout the length and breadth of Guyana, some of whom submitted written submissions, and some of whom participated in face-to-face or virtual engagements, sharing ideas, making suggestions, and discussing issues. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I trust that I will be forgiven for saving the last word for my own team at the Ministry of Finance. Who, over the past few weeks, made it eminently evident to me why, on my return to the ministry, I really did feel like I was returning home. And I thank them for the energy they exerted in preparing this budget. It wasn't difficult, it wasn't easy, as you can imagine. They invested tremendous long hours, and I think, and I trust that all of the members of this House will agree that I think they did a phenomenal job. With those few words, with those not so few words,
Go ahead. Those few words.
with those not so few words, Mr. Speaker, the privilege is mine on this People's Progressive Party civic government's behalf to propose this Budget 2021 for consideration and approval by this Honourable House. I thank you very much.